Now, from CBS News Miami, this is Facing South Florida with Jim DeFede.
Welcome to Facing South Florida. I'm Jim DeFede. The Iowa caucuses are over, and former President Donald Trump won with more than 50% of the vote, 30 points ahead of Governor Ron DeSantis, who a month earlier was predicting he would win in Iowa because of his exceptional ground game. DeSantis invested millions into his operation in Iowa. He visited all 99 counties and held more than 250 events, but it was all for naught. Nevertheless, DeSantis declared victory Monday night.
They threw everything but the kitchen sink at us. They spent almost $50 million attacking us. No one's faced that much all the way just through Iowa. The media was against us. They were writing our obituary months ago. They even called the election before people even got a chance to vote. But they were just so excited about the fact that they were predicting that we wouldn't be able to get our ticket punched here out of Iowa. But I can tell you, because of your support, in spite of all of that they threw at us, everyone against us, we've got our ticket punched out of Iowa.
He got his ticket punched and his clock cleaned. The day after the Iowa caucuses, anchor Elliot Rodriguez and I spoke to Amanda Rooker, the chief political reporter for the CBS station in Des Moines, KCCI.
I think there's a couple things here, Jim. I think, number one, the cold definitely played a role because Ron DeSantis was trying to touch as many hands as possible, get as many people out there. But, you know, you can't predict a once-in-a-decade storm with blizzard conditions and sub-zero temperatures. I mean, that had an impact. But another thing, I think, maybe was DeSantis's calculations going into this race. I talked to Ron DeSantis just a couple days before the caucus and asked him how much he modeled his campaign based off of past or previous caucus winners, Mike Huckabee, Ted Cruz, Rick Santorum. He told me that they largely did base their campaign off of these three winners, based off of the grassroots ground game that those three winners had. Those three winners did the 99 county tour. They invested heavily in evangelical voters in Iowa. They, shook every hand and, really just made that grassroots Iowa traditional style the core of their campaign. And I think DeSantis saw that and modeled his campaign off of that. What's different here, though, is that this is largely an unprecedented caucus cycle because Donald Trump came in with a name recognition that we really haven't seen in a caucus cycle before. A former president kind of running as a quasi-incumbent. That really threw a curveball into this whole caucus cycle, and it was hard to predict, how much of an impact that was going to have. I think DeSantis kept telling us, hey, this ground game is going to pay off because Trump has more name recognition than me. But once I introduce myself to every Iowan in the state and convince them that I'm a better choice, they're going to go tell their friends and neighbors. But it looks like at the end of the day, Donald Trump just has this mega celebrity status about him. When I went to events, I look back at the Iowa State Fair back in August. I mean, Nikki Haley and Ron DeSantis, they had decent-sized crowds that showed up to see them. But when Donald Trump came, it was almost like the whole state fair shut down. I mean, there was just herds and herds of people climbing up on cars just to get a glimpse of Trump, and people waiting in hours-long lines just to watch him walk in. And so we wondered, is that because he was a former president or because he just has that much support in Iowa? And, he clearly came away with the landslide victory on caucus night. So you can take that to mean, what you want.
The next contest is in New Hampshire, where polls show DeSantis is just in single digits. DeSantis' brand of politics, his attack on Disney, his push for a 6-week abortion ban, and his policy of banning books, does not play well in a state whose motto is live free or die. Late last week, I spoke to Aaron Navarro. He is the CBS News political reporter covering the DeSantis campaign. I asked about the mood in the campaign following Iowa.
They acknowledge that Trump won by 30 points, and you'll hear DeSantis say this himself, and that's a pretty good margin, they acknowledge, for someone looking to be the next nominee. They treat it as he's the quasi-incumbent. They argue that he got 50%, but there's another 50% that wants something else, and that's what we need to tap into. Going forward from Iowa, there was a sense of disappointment when I was at their watch party at the West Des Moines and that Sheraton over there. It seems like they really thought they could get closer. Maybe not within the 10 points that some allies were talking about, but better than the polls. They were more so afterwards spinning it as a good day because they beat Haley and that there wasn't that disaster of coming in third in Iowa, even though that difference between DeSantis and Haley was so close. But going forward, they're obviously in New Hampshire, but shifting resources to South Carolina. They think that's a state that they can force Haley out of the race, essentially. It's not a state that they think they can win. They just think that they can cut up and cut into Haley's base enough that she would get third, and because it's her home state, that she would get out of the race, and it gets it down to a two-man race that they've been wanting against Trump since they started their campaign.
How is he being received there in New Hampshire when you're traveling around with him?
Well, I often run into people from Massachusetts at these events that get smaller crowds compared to Nikki Haley or Donald Trump, like significantly smaller. I think, as you mentioned, the electorate is just different. It's more independent. It's more of those moderate Republicans, maybe fiscally conservative, but more moderately on the social issues, such as abortion and some of the culture war issues that DeSantis has been waging in Florida. And frankly, he just kind of spent much less time. In mid-August, really, is when we stopped seeing him do the leapfrog of Iowa to New Hampshire, New Hampshire to Iowa. It was mainly all Iowa at that point. He would have two stops, two swings a month in October, November, and December. And obviously, after the Iowa caucuses, when he came back here to New Hampshire. But for the month of September, he did not visit New Hampshire for any campaign events. So it's like an acknowledgement, and you see it in the polls, his campaign season in the polls, that DeSantis just does not have the support there to, make a difference in a meaningful way. That being said, because Vivek Ramaswamy is out, because Chris Christie is out, there are really only three options, and DeSantis has treated it as just a way to get delegates. You have to get at least 10% to get any of the state's 22 delegates. And that seems to be DeSantis' goal, at least at this point.
You talk about how after the Iowa caucuses, he's now in New Hampshire, but he stopped first in South Carolina. It seems to me that his next big place where he's going to try to, again, push those chips, although he's probably got fewer chips at this point, but push those chips is in South Carolina. Why does he think South Carolina sets up a little bit better for him than perhaps in New Hampshire?
The upstate of South Carolina is not exactly the same, but it's similar to the Iowa electorate. You have evangelical voters there that DeSantis has made overtures to. He's made some stops in South Carolina in the past that have gotten a good reception. And I was there in Greenville the day after the Iowa caucus, and he packed airport hangar beyond capacity. And it was the most energy I've seen from a DeSantis crowd in a while, especially when you compare it to his crowds in New Hampshire. They just think that that's the state that they can force Nikki Haley out of the race. They think that Nikki Haley will lose her home state. They want to maybe get her to third and surpass her, and that it'll change the race. It'll change it to just a one-on-one against Trump. The question is, once you get that one-on-one and you look at Super Tuesday, if you're the DeSantis campaign and can make it to that point, what states could you actually beat Trump in? I think that's the open question.
In talking to folks in the final week leading into the Iowa caucus, you started hearing, or I at least started hearing, from folks inside DeSantis's world that, well, regardless of what happens in Iowa, we're in it for the long haul. We're going to stay. This is going to be a delicate fight. And it seems almost in part that the DeSantis campaign wants to at least stick around, try to pick off a few delegates here and there, I guess hoping that something again radically happens to shake up the race. Either, Donald Trump maybe being convicted or some new cataclysmic event hitting Donald Trump that would then leave DeSantis in that position to be the heir apparent. But again, he's been hoping for that for a while. It just hasn't happened. And campaigns, usually don't end. They just run out of money. How is the financial situation for the DeSantis campaign? I know that they were down to, compared to where they were, in terms of the amount of money they have. They're running on fumes right now, aren't they?
Yeah, and the day after the Iowa caucus, there was a finance meeting on DeSantis's campaign, and from talking to some people there, they got the sense that the campaign is confident on making it through to South Carolina financially. After that, they're hoping to get an influx. They obviously need more money to come in, and getting second, but getting beat by 30 points in Iowa is not necessarily a big confidence boost if you're a donor looking to find a non-Trump candidate. So that's going to be the challenge for them is can they survive this next month, especially if he does very poorly in New Hampshire, even though he's ceded ground, but just the headlines will read DeSantis gets, 2-5%, if that ends up being the scenario. That's certainly not going to motivate any new donors, any new money to come in. So it's weird how they're putting their chips on South Carolina, kind of ceding ground in New Hampshire, but there is still something at stake for them in New Hampshire.
We'll be going to South Carolina in the coming weeks for what may well be DeSantis' last stand in this race. Now, when we come back, we'll turn to Congress, which passed another stopgap funding bill to keep the government open. We'll talk to South Florida Congressman Jared Moskowitz when we return. Stay with us.